Hi everyone. If you're even a little bit interested in King Arthur, then you have undoubtedly heard of the Battle of Badon. This was the climactic battle between Arthur and the British forces against the Saxons. But have you ever wondered, if Arthur was the one leading the Britons, then who was the one leading the Saxons? That's a very interesting question. So, according to the earliest account of the Battle of Badon, not the earliest reference to it, but the earliest account of the battle, which was Geoffrey of Monmouth's 12th century Historia Regum Britanniae, the leader of the Saxons at that battle was a person called Celdric. But according to Welsh records, the Saxon leader was a person called Osler, also known as Osler Big Knife. That was his epithet, Big Knife. But obviously Celdric and Osler are totally different names. So how can those two records be reconciled? Are they just fictional, or is there a potential explanation for this? Well, if we have a look at some of the historical evidence about this battle, and we look at some of the historical details that we have available to us, then we just might be able to work this out. So, firstly, the matter of where the Battle of Badon took place is very important, because obviously different Saxon leaders were active in different areas of Britain. So there's wide agreement, not completely universal, but there's very wide agreement that Badon was located in somewhere in the southwest of the country. There are a few places in Wiltshire that have been proposed, and one of my favourites, if not my actual favourite, is Mynydd Badon in southeast Wales. But generally, that general area of the country, the southwest of the island of Britain, is where almost everyone agrees the Battle of Badon took place. So, who was the Saxon leader active in the southwest of the country when the Battle of Badon took place? Well, the problem, of course, is determining when the Battle of Badon took place, because that would obviously affect the answer to that question of who was active when it occurred. According to the chronology I present in my book, I believe that the Battle of Badon most likely occurred in 548, but let's say 550 for simplicity. So, was there, or do we know who the Saxon leader was in the southwest of Britain in about the middle of the 6th century? Well, generally that's been supposed to be the son of a person called Cerdic of Wessex. His son was Cynric. But according to the revised chronology of the Kingdom of Wessex proposed by David Dumville, a very renowned scholar, actually the chronology of the kings of the early part of the dynasty of Wessex should be moved forward by 19 years. And so when you do that, then you see that actually Cerdic was the one who was around, well, he died in 553, if we use this 19-year adjustment, which David Dumville argues for convincingly. So that would mean that Cerdic seems to be the one who was active in that region of Britain at that time, and he died in almost exactly the same year in which I place the Battle of Badon. And given that the dates for the dynasty of Wessex come from records hundreds of years later, it's completely acceptable that they'd be out by a few years. So the difference between my date of 548 for the Battle of Badon and the date of 553 for Cerdic's death, that's not a significant difference. So how does this tie in with the legends? Well, you may already have noticed this, but Cerdic is a very similar name to Celdric. They're not identical, but they're very similar, and I think it's a very reasonable supposition that the Celdric of Geoffrey's record could be a corruption of the name Cerdic. So Cerdic was the leader of the Kingdom of Wessex, which was the Saxon kingdom which was being founded through conquest at the same time in which Arthur was active in the same general area, according to my chronology. So it makes sense that they would have clashed, and the fact that his name is so similar to the name of Arthur's enemy in the Historia Regum Britanniae, I think that if you accept my chronological adjustment for Arthur's reign and David Dunville's chronological adjustment for Cerdic's reign, then it's pretty much an inevitability that Cerdic is Celdric, the Celdric who appears in the Historia Regum Britanniae. But this still doesn't explain Osla. So Osla doesn't feature in Geoffrey of Monmouth's record, but he does feature in Welsh records. So how can we explain this? Well, interestingly, if you look at the records of the Kingdom of Wessex, and you look at Cerdic's grandfather, his name is recorded as being Esla, which is very similar to Osla. It's only different by one letter. And again, given that both these records, the Welsh record about Osla and the Saxon records about the dynasty of Wessex, they both come from hundreds of years after the fact, I don't think there's any significant difference between Osla and Esla. So what can we conclude from this? Well, in my opinion, likely Osla was the high ruler, you could say, the overall ruler of the Saxons in that area, the Kingdom of Wessex. But Cerdic, his grandson, would have been the actual leader of the armies. Perhaps Osla was maybe in his 70s, perhaps, and so he wasn't really in a position to lead the armies, so his grandson Cerdic was the one who actually led the armies. And I think that is the most elegant explanation of why Geoffrey has this Celdric as the leader of the Saxons at Badon, whereas the Welsh records have this Osla as the leader of the Saxons at Badon. So I think they're both just different memories of the same thing, essentially, but one of them is remembering the high ruler of the Saxons, Esla, the grandfather of Cerdic, whereas Geoffrey, through the line of transmission that ended up in the Historia Regum Britanniae, that preserved the name of the actual ruler of the armies, Cerdic, which then became corrupted into Celdric. So I think that explaining it in terms of the dynasty of Wessex is the most elegant explanation for, well, one, how it ties in with historical facts, but also why we get these two different names in Welsh records and the Historia Regum Britanniae.